welcome to our podcast. This is the fourth episode of Making Rights Real, which is trying to very much look at how we can look at the links between human rights and everyday life. And today I'm delighted to welcome Alex Brennan from Northern Ireland Women's Budget Group.
Hi, Anna. Thanks for having me.
And Omna Srini Ong from Engender Consultancy and the Gender Budget Group Malaysia.
Hi, Anna. Hi, Alex.
And today we're looking at gender budgeting as a concrete mechanism for holding governments to account and looking at the impact that government decisions have on gender equality. Gender budgeting isn't mentioned in human rights frameworks specifically because it has developed since they were developed, but it is a very concrete way of looking at that sort of accountability and also producing data, which is something that most governments don't have enough of. So my first question to both Alex and Omna is, how do you think gender budgeting links to human rights frameworks?
So I was going to say that on a broader sense, gender budgeting helps governments align to international human rights frameworks, right? But more importantly, it helps states to fulfill their obligations already enshrined in their respective national constitutions, their legislations and policies. And that essentially is their commitment to their own people to create more equitable societies where all individuals have the opportunity to realize rights fully. Exactly what you said just now, Yona, about making rights real. And gender responsive budgeting allows us to do that. So it is a powerful tool to advance human rights by promoting gender equality through informed fiscal policies, right? So it identifies inequalities between women and men through data-driven analysis, and that's a prerequisite. It provides equitable and targeted allocations of fiscal resources. It empowers and it creates equal opportunities for disadvantaged groups in the population, where we know for a fact that women continue to be disproportionately facing discrimination and exclusion. So through gender responsive budgeting, governments have a strategic tool, and the operative word is really strategic. It's a strategic tool that can enhance accountability, efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency in the entire governance framework. Sounds very magical, but it's true. Yeah. By addressing gender disparities in the budgeting processes, governments actually have the potential to create more equitable societies where all individuals have the opportunity to realize their rights fully. So right now, what we are seeing is that in many countries, we are making some kind of a steady progress. But globally, data reflects that we are far from achieving gender parity, and that is really worrying. I mean, we all know and read, anticipate, wait for the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report every year. But this year, or rather last year, it told us that it'll take 134 years to achieve global gender parity. And I'm sure, Alex, you, myself, Joanna, we want it in our lifetime.
Absolutely.
But then despite the seemingly bleak outlook, I think we're also seeing a rise in social consciousness, and I think you'll agree with me, and recognition across the board of the need for a gender perspective and a lens in all areas of development. So this essentially, long story short, is the concept of gender mainstreaming, right? Now, this year is a very significant year. And looking back, it's significant because it marks the 30th year in the rollout of the Global Roadmap for Gender Equality.
Yeah.
Which is the Beijing Platform for Action. And it's especially personally very important for me because I was there in Beijing in 1995. So this is really the Beijing Platform for Action is the outcome document of the 4th UN World Women's Conference. And in it, categorically, gender mainstreaming was established as a major global strategy for the promotion of gender equality. And this year, the Commission on the Status of Women in March, we're going to take stock of that. So since 2015, we see the evolutionary nature of even how gender mainstreaming is recognized, understood, rolled out. So the SDGs further reiterate the need to finance gender equality this time. by adding an indicator, SDG 5C1, which monitors countries with systems first to track it and to publicly disclose allocations for gender equality and women's empowerment. This is very, very significant because now you have, if you don't have a system nationally to track this, there is global pressure to track this.
Yeah, I think you outlined that really, really well, Nat. And I think, your reference to the SDGs, the aims around gender equality don't just exist in, obviously CEDAW is explicitly gendered, but you could also look at like ICESCR, the International Convention on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, or ICCPR, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. They all refer to the achievement of gender equality. And like you said, SDG 5 is around the attainment of gender equality, but that's all within the context of all of these equalities, or rather inequalities, are linked, and you can't just achieve climate justice without achieving gender equality, or you can't achieve economic, social and cultural rights without the inclusion of gender equality within that, because obviously, women don't just exist within, they're not just women, they have all these other characteristics as well that need to be, figured into the achievement of gender equality. Specifically, like you said, gender equality is without a doubt an important human right. And it's also referred to in the first two articles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I think also in Northern Ireland specifically, it's been really positive to see our own Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission explicitly refer to gender budgeting in a number of its recommendations that have come out from their annual human rights statement that came out in, was it December 2024, Jana?
Yeah.
So one of them specifically was regarding the gender equality strategy here, which has been stalled. And I think that's been a source of much frustration for at least people that are working within the women's sector here. But, on, again, the achievement of wider equality aims. And they referred to, that the strategy should be accompanied by measurable plan of action and effective monitoring mechanisms that are guided by gender budgeting. So again, they talk about the participation of women in public and political life, and they refer to the adopting of a gender-sensitive approach and embedding gender budgeting within law and policymaking in Northern Ireland. And then on the gender pay gaps specifically, they refer to it where they say that including a gender budgeting lens, immediate steps should be taken to address any issues identified. So our own Human Rights Commission sees the value in gender budgeting tools and mechanisms to bring about their wider sort of human rights agenda. So I think, we have our human rights infrastructure here has a really good understanding of how gender budgeting connects to wider human rights goals or attainment. It's just, kind of like you were saying, maybe that like political or more systemic structure is the issues that we have, as opposed to, I think people within the human rights world are well aware of how this can make tangible differences.
How do you build that political will? What changes do we need to make a government move from talking to action? And maybe, Alex, if you can start on that.
Yeah, so in Northern Ireland, we actually have seen quite quickly some positive movements in political will, but that has been, within the past year or so, or couple of months. Like it's, we've been working on this for years now, and it can all happen quite quickly, but we still have a lot of barriers that remain that could halt that political will from, progressing any further. So some of the current barriers that we have referred to in my answer to the last question around the gender neutral approach to policy making, where you not necessarily, I don't think there's a recognition that you can actually use policies and budgets to either mitigate against gender inequalities or, promote gender equality measures. And they kind of see it as like, well, if we don't do anything at all, then that's being equal to everybody, without realizing that not doing anything at all means that you're actually just upholding, again, the disadvantages that we currently have in our society. We have, which may be a bit unique to us, a misunderstanding of equality, and particularly gender equality in general. There was a bit of research that Ulster University did amongst officials where they kind of found that there was a lack of understanding between equality and equity, and, that kind of thing of you're creating policies or you're taking budgetary decisions to improve or take away disadvantage, as opposed to, well, we can't do one thing for one group because then we'd have to do the same thing for the other group, even if that issue or that inequality doesn't exist for them. So we'll not do it either. And I know, we see that all the time, and it's really clear in some of the decisions that are taken to either resource certain policies or to even progress policies further. But that's definitely a barrier. And again, like I said, we have had more recently better commitment at political and official levels, but I don't think we're at a point where systemic transformation is accepted and that people are willing to make that change. There's tons of research to say that it actually has made tangible differences around the world, and that it's, OECD says itself that it's good budgeting. There's obviously that focus on equality, but it's also just good budgeting measures. Training is needed to build capacity within our own official and political system to actually carry out gender budgeting. And that will come with, again, like the barriers to that is lack of data and whatnot, but it couldn't just be like an hour online or something. Like, we actually need to break that understanding or that lack of understanding of what equality is, and make sure that when we implement gender budgeting or gender budgeting tools and processes, that the people that are doing it actually know how to do it. And this change needs to be transformational, but not in the sense, we hear that word all the time. It's almost like a buzzword at the minute, but we need it to actually change systems entirely. And when you talk about importance of political will, it is crucial because, there's that three-pronged approach of the political, official, and civil society will that is equally as important. And that's something that we've heard of from international experiences of this starting at different levels of those involved in the policy process. So sometimes it does start within civil society, which is the way it is here. And sometimes it's officials that bring it to the table, and sometimes it's from political actors. But because it's coming from civil society, the difficult or challenge, I should say, is getting that political and official will. We had a motion that was passed in our assembly around gender budgeting that was put up on an opposition day, and it passed. And it was around trying to get gender budgeting measures within our 25-26 budget period, which obviously we're here as a women's budget group to support our government, support our officials, and trying to actually get that motion realized and seen. And, again, that will be difficult as we are entering that budgeting, that financial year now, essentially. But, it's positive to even hear it being debated within our assembly. A couple of years ago, we couldn't have even imagined that. And I'm sure you could speak a little bit more to that, but that's, that is the importance of political will, is getting that conversation there.
I feel a great sense of sisterhood right now, in the sense that, many things are becoming a global phenomena, right? So I see so many parallels in our journey, in all that you're sharing just now. In Malaysia, maybe I'll share a little bit about Malaysia as well, in examples, as I'm talking about the different aspects of embedding gender budgeting in policymaking. So institutionalizing gender responsive budgeting in policymaking, I'd like to think that it requires knowledge. You must know what it is, right? Volition, which is really where the political will lies, not only at the highest level, but across the hierarchy of government officials, and action. So you can't have one without the other. You can't have knowledge and no volition. You need all of it. So it's a package deal. And it needs to involve all key stakeholders in government, civil society, and private sector. And we're realizing that more and more. And why do I say private sector? Is also because of the ESG framework, the compliance that private sector is now having to align to. Otherwise, they won't even get grants, they won't get foreign investment and so on. So there's a forced compliance there. So it's like a lot of push factors pushing this whole of society towards compliance, towards adhering to gender equality standards. So it's as if there's multiple forces at work, to support the generations of civil society who have struggled thus far. So we can look at several key changes, and I'll give some examples and practices that we are seeing being implemented. I would say that, it's almost, in a very colloquial term, I refer to this as a cha-cha-cha dance. And I think you and I have said it before. You take 3 steps forward, 2 steps backward, and sometimes 5 steps backward and 2 steps forward. It's frustrating, and yet we pursue, right? We have hope. It requires high-level commitment from public administrative institutions to prioritize gender considerations in all areas of budgetary decision-making, not just with the finance division. So it begins, we've identified actually 5 divisions. So it's looking at the policy division, the implementing division, the statistical data division, the monitoring evaluation division, and of course, the center of it all is the finance division. So you need also that whole of government approach. So it should not just be the responsibility of a single department or ministry, and they should involve all sectors in government. So let me give an example of Malaysia, right? So the government instituted GRB as early as 2004, but it faced several challenges in taking it forward at the national level. But then what we saw, it's strange, the national level begins, sets up that framework, and then it takes a pause, literally took a pause. But then we saw emerging at the subnational level, there was a state where there was receptivity. That was in Penang, the northern state. And there was receptivity there. And then by leaps and bounds, till today, up to today, have institutionalized gender mainstreaming and gender responsive budgeting to a much higher level. And then now we are seeing another central state, the largest, economically largest state in Malaysia, where I live, that is now talking about mainstreaming gender and gender responsive budgeting. And I missed the session this morning. They were actually awarding or rather presenting appointment letters to gender focal points.
Wow.
Very interesting how it's developing now at the subnational level. But then in 2022, at the national level, GRB made a comeback where the Ministry of Finance took the lead in partnerships with civil society to make technical capacity building for all ministries, right? And then the Ministry of Finance also became the lead ministry for gender responsive budgeting, while the lead ministry on gender equality policy remained with the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development. And they appointed gender focal points, reappointed gender focal points in 2022. So it's very interesting how, whether it was through civil society or at the national level, through subnational interest, that you find there is this renewed receptivity to gender responsive budgeting.
What's needed to make gender budgeting work in practice?
I would say, we need civil society, political and official support, kind of like I said, that three-pronged approach. I think it's Dr. Angela O'Hagan from Scotland has mentioned that a number of times. And we need a willingness for complete systems change, which, does require a bit of risk-taking, but we would see not doing this as risky behavior, which, I mentioned in my previous question.
Yeah, so I would say what we are seeing now is a great interest by legislators, lawmakers in the parliament on gender responsive budgeting, or even gender mainstreaming, or even fundamentally gender. So I think to strengthen their oversight capacity, which is what we are doing as well, of legislators, lawmakers in mandating gender analysis, and also mandating gender impact assessments of all bills and policies that are tabled in Parliament. So if they mandate that, then there is an entry of legislations, for example, they've already gone through a gender impact assessment at the ministerial level, which would already beckon capacity building for those ministries to be able to do that. So lawmakers have that power to mandate such a thing.
That's a really lovely conclusion, because that brings us right back to human rights frameworks. Thank you so much, Omna and Alex, for joining us today. Thanks to you for listening. And our next episode will look at bringing in voices of people from all backgrounds in decision making. Bye.